Hello, John Zimmerman from GEDmathlessons.com. And what I want to do in this video is go over just a general overview of the new 2014 GED math requirements. So I know there's a lot of concern out there about the old GED versus the new GED, the 2014 version, and this talk that it's more difficult, more challenging. It's certainly more in-depth. So what I want to do is just give you a quick overview. It's going to take a few minutes, but I'm going to kind of scan through the requirements and kind of summarize them the best I could as a math teacher, give you a good sense of what's going to be expected of you as far as your knowledge and skills, and then we'll kind of talk about the best way for you to prepare. Okay, all right, so let's just go through these one by one. So number operations, this is the basic type of skills in mathematics when you're working with just numbers. Okay, we'll get into algebra in a second. So number operations would include things like fractions, okay, which are also known as rational numbers. And by the way, this is an overview, so if you're totally lost on some of the things that I'm going to be talking about, and I'm sure you will be, don't worry about it now, because this is not, a course, if you will. I'll give you some information on how to prepare towards the end of this video, but I just want to kind of give you a sense of some of the big picture topics going to be on the test. Okay, so fractions, which are also known as rational numbers, and working with fractions. So how to reduce a fraction, for example. All right, so here's a fraction, or maybe how to add two fractions. Okay, so something like this, or subtract them or multiply them. So working with various numbers, and there's a big emphasis about rational numbers. And once again, this word rational, essentially mathematics means fractions. So you're really going to have to be a master at working at fractions. Okay, another thing that's going to be on the test is going to be a lot of measurement problems. Essentially, these are things like computing the area of a triangle or the perimeter. So generally, you're given like a formula, like for example, the area of a circle would be pi r squared. Okay, so you would have to know that r is the radius of the circle, and then, if you have the radius, what do you do, or how do you compute this to get the area? And another thing about measurement is, do you know the proper units of measure? So kind of just a quick example. So length, okay, so here, if I was going to measure the length of a rectangle, okay, that would be, say, for example, let's say 10 inches, okay, and let's say this was 5 inches over here. If I was going to compute the area, okay, I would multiply these two together, and those units of measures would be inches squared. Okay, so, and then of course if you're going to get into volume, that's going to be inches cubed, etc. So they're also going to be looking at your sense of, do you understand measurement, and can you work with numbers to compute a lot of these things. All right, so let's move on to algebra, because there's a pretty good amount of topics to cover. And once again, this is not a crash course in all of these topics, just to give you a pretty good sense. And I'm not even covering everything. There's a lot of little subtopics, if you will, but I did my research and I scanned through what was expected. I think this is pretty representative of the bulk of what would be expected to you. And it's essentially a pre-algebra or algebra 1 course, if you will. All right, so let's talk about algebra now. So another thing you're going to be expected to do is evaluate expressions. So let me give you an example. Let's say I had 2x y plus 10. Okay, so that's just what we call an expression in algebra. It has some variables, has some numbers, etc. And if I said evaluate this thing for x equals 5 and y equals 3, what I would be asking you to do is to plug these numbers in. Okay, so if x is 5, I would want you to plug in 5 for the x, and then if y is 3, I'd want you to plug in 3 right here, and then you would have to go ahead and simplify, multiply these together, add it to 10, etc., to evaluate that. That's what that word means. So it's a lot of that in algebra, so you'll certainly be seeing that. So let's move on to some more topics. So that's evaluating expressions. Solving equations. So this is a huge one, okay, and a big core skill in algebra. So give you another basic example. Let's say something like this. I'm not going to do this. It's just going to take too much time. So here's a basic equation. I would say this is not overly difficult. Okay. So it wouldn't be more, you would be expected to solve more challenging equations than this. So do you know how to solve this? Okay, do you know the steps to solve that? All right, so here you would do the distributive property, and then you would collect all the x's on one side, the numbers on the other side, etc., etc. So it's a good amount of steps, and this is certainly a core skill that you're going to have to master, how to solve equations. Now let's take a look at another thing that's going to be on the test, and that's graphing linear equations. Now that's kind of a fancy, I like to call it kind of like a fancy term, but essentially this means graphing lines. And I'm just going to sketch something over here real quick. So if you recall, back in your school days, remember we had the XY chart, okay? So we call that the coordinate plane in mathematics. So what you're going to be doing is graphing points on it, graphing lines, and lines, the mathematical nomenclature, the technical term for a line is a linear equation. So these are things that are like y equals mx plus b, etc. Then, or find the slope of a line given 2 points. Oh man, there's a really huge amount of subtopics in this area as well. So this is going to be something you're really going to be expected to know a lot about. Okay, so graphing linear equations. All right, let's move on to our next topic: rates, ratios, and proportions. So rates and ratios are essentially fractions with particular units of measure. So an example of a ratio would be, let's say here, 2 teachers for every 50 students. Okay, so here's a fraction. It's comparing two numbers, teachers to students. So you'd say, oh, what's the ratio of teachers to students? Well, if you reduce this fraction, it would be 1/25. Okay, there's one teacher for every 25 students. Okay, and once again, if you're lost and and trust me, don't take what I'm trying to teach you kind of comprehend it too much, if you will, because this is not lessons on it. You could just be like, hey, I just got to learn this from the beginning. Okay, but this is an example of a ratio. Now, a proportion problem would be, okay, if there's one teacher to 25 students, how many teachers would we need if we have 500 students? Okay, so this would be an example of a proportion, and a proportion in mathematics is two equal fractions or two equal rates and ratios. So this is really a pretty big topic as well, and I'm sure you're going to be doing a good amount of problems, or you'll definitely see a few, I would imagine, on the new GED. All right, so let's talk about absolute value. Now, some of you out there might have heard of absolute value. The notation for it is 2 bars. So let's say the absolute value of -3. So some of you out there might recall that the absolute value of numbers is a positive number. So the absolute value of -3 is just 3. And what the absolute value represents in algebra is the distance a number is from 0 on a number line. Okay, so -3, if I plot it on a number line, it's right here. Okay, it's 3 units away from 0. Okay, and so is 3. So the absolute value is really a discussion, or not a discussion, if you will. It's the concept has to do with the distance a number is from 0. Okay, and there's absolute value equations, there's absolute value inequalities, on and on and on. All right, so just a quick, tiny little look into absolute value. All right, systems. Now this is really huge at the algebra study, and this is a massive topic in mathematics in general. But the type of systems that you're going to be talking about, or probably see to some degree, are what we call linear systems. All right, so I'm just draw, or write out, excuse me, a basic example. What a system looks like. And this is what we call a 2x2 system. There's 2 linear equations, and really these are just lines. Okay, the equations of lines. So you can see here we have 2 variables, x and y. So here's an equation, and it has 2 variables, an x and a y. And here's another equation, and it also has two variables, x and a y. And a system is essentially two lines, if you will, kind of like grouped together as one model. But the idea of what you're going to have to do is to know probably a little bit about systems, what they represent, and their solutions, and then of course how to solve a system. And to solve a system is to determine what x would be equal to and what y would be equal to. Okay, and there's a couple key techniques that you're going to need to know to be able to solve a system. Okay, so that was systems. And I'm just basically flying through an Algebra 1 course in a few minutes. So, like I said, don't be overwhelmed. The whole idea here is to give you a sense of some of the main topics that are going to be on that new GED. All right. And before going any further, we may not see all of these topics. That's the funny thing about tests, right? I mean, exams, aren't going to cover 100% of everything they want you to know. So there might be a systems problem, and I'm going to talk about quadratic equations here in a second. And you might study for quadratic equations, but there may not be a problem on that GED test you took that day. But if you go back and take the GED again, you might see a quadratic equations problem. So, that's the nature of tests. You have to study everything to kind of get ready for and do the best you can on these tests. Okay, quadratic equations. Just give you an example of what one would look like. So this is an example of a quadratic equation. It's an equation where the highest power of the variable is 2. And the type of expressions that we're talking about are polynomial expressions. I'm not going to get too far into it, but there's some pretty sophisticated techniques to be able to solve an equation like this. Now, if you remember, the other equations that we were looking at would be something like, let's say like this. Okay, here's a basic linear equation. If you notice the x here, 2x, this is just 2x to the first power. Okay, here this is x squared. Okay, it's because this is to the first power. This is what we call a linear equation. But when we start messing around with variables that are higher powers, okay, we start getting into things like quadratic equations and then even more advanced things as well. But probably you're not going to see anything more advanced than quadratic equations on the GED. All right, so basic geometry. So what are we talking about here? Well, we'd be talking about finding the area, surface area. I'm just going to abbreviate volume. Pretty much basic figures, okay? So this would be like, say, cubes, circles, okay, cones. The kind of list goes on and on and on. Okay, so you're going to have to be able to know some formulas, okay, and how to apply them, and then once again the units of measure, okay, that go along with them. Okay, word problems. So word problems is essentially an application of all these skills. I'm not even going to draw right out an example. Just one, I can't think of one off the top of my head. But we all have a sense of what a word problem is. But the thing about word problems is you have to practice them. So essentially, one, you're going to have these skills down, and then two, to get ready for this, there's no other way to get around it. You're going to have to practice. But before you can practice and apply what you know, you have to master these skills. So that's why you have to take these, take approaching this test in a logical manner. Okay, you got to get your skills down first, and then you practice, word problems. You just can't say, well, let me solve this word problem, but you don't even know how to deal with the skills that are going to be required in the problem. So there's a kind of an order to everything. All right, basic probability. This would be pretty much like, hey, given 4 chances to do something, let's see here, for every one, oh boy, let me see here, I don't want to confuse you, but it's, I'm going to actually skip a probability because I have to explain it to you and on and on. But basic probability, pretty much like the odds. Hey, what are the odds? Or what are the chances? These are key words that indicate probability. What are the chances of something happening? What's the probability of something happening? And really, when you come to study basic probability, it's essentially a fraction, okay? Probability is a fraction of well, let me see here. Let me go ahead and just take a stab out, see if I can explain this real quick to you. So basic probability is the number of ways something that you would like to happen over the total possible outcomes. All right, and I'm totally scratching here, okay? That's the probability of an event, okay? The number of ways something could happen over the total number of ways of the possible outcomes. So when you compare those to, when you write that fraction out, you're going to get a probability, okay? Then you can look at that in terms of a fraction or a percentage term. So there'll be some basic probability. I don't think there'll be a lot on there, but you definitely want to be familiar with some of the basic concepts. All right, moving on. Sorry if I confused you on that probability. It can be, sometimes it's kind of hard, especially as I'm kind of going through this, to come up with an easy example. All right, data and graphs. I think this is a little bit easier to see. This would be things like bar graphs, looking at bar graphs and coming up with some interpretation of what they mean percentage-wise, or drawing some conclusions from these graphs, which represent data. So you want to have practice looking at different graphs, and pretty much you're looking for trends, etc. So data and graphs, that's a kind of big thing also. For sure you're going to see some sort of graphs on a GED. I can't imagine you wouldn't. All right, so you want to be familiar with, hey, how do you work with problems where, let's say this is your 401k statement, and here we have 30% in stocks. This would be maybe 45% in bonds. This would be, I don't know, 15% in CDs, etc., right? So the question might be like, well, what percentage of stocks and bonds, how much money in stocks and bonds do you have out of your entire portfolio? Okay, so you would have to kind of say, okay, I got to take this part of the circle and then this part of the circle, then find the percentage out of the entire thing. So this would be kind of a real quick example of the type of question that you might see working with data and graphs. Well, once again, the only way to get good at these things is to practice them. And that's why you have to get the skills and then just do a ton of practice problems. Okay, functions. I think this is the last thing I'm going to talk about. Functions in algebra look like this. Okay, something like, this is just an example of one, okay? So it's this notation, f of x, 2x plus 1, another huge topic. But I might say, given this function, f of x equals 2x plus 1, evaluate the function for 2. And that just means plug in 2 where you see x. So it would be something like this, and then you go on and on. So that's just a quick example of what a function would look like. But once again, I'm just so overly simplifying these things. Well, listen, as I told you, I was going to say, one, hopefully you're not exacerbated by, or just I think I used the wrong word there, but hope you're not just scared away like, oh, this is just too much. It's just impossible. No, you can do this. You can definitely do this. What I want you to do is take a look at my site, okay, GEDmathlessons.com. I built this thing from the time of this video about a year and a half ago, and I really built it with not even knowing the new 2014 requirements were coming. I built this thing to over-prepare students for the old GED, and in doing so, I actually built this course to align very, very nicely to the 2014 requirements. So come on over to GEDmathlessons.com, get enrolled. It's a totally free math course, okay? It's video based, extremely comprehensive, and I'll tell you something, I've had thousands and thousands and thousands of people go through my course, and I am just so happy with the feedback. I'm getting people, adults, people who've struggled in math for years and years and used a lot of various other GED prep programs and just have not succeeded. But for whatever reason, and I think it's because my course is very comprehensive and it's video based and you can control the pace, people are finding success. Now, I pretty much hit all those topics in a comprehensive way. So I'm going to tell you basically, one, there's no cheating learning math, okay? I've been doing this for many, many, many years, okay? I have a degree in math, I have a master's degree, education, and this is what I do, and I've been doing this for a long time. So I could just tell you, if you're looking for shortcut methods, you're probably setting yourself up for failure. Okay, there's really no shortcut methods. You have to put the time in, and the hardest part for most people on the GED is the math section. So kind of organize your time and commit to say, I'm going to do this. So if you go to my site, you can sign up and you can start the course in a logical manner, and it will cover pretty much, I would say 90-95% of the skills that you're going to need for the GED, the 2014 GED. Okay, and with that as well, I would say you need to get a hold of a good GED book, okay, a newer version with practice test, so you can practice the exam format, etc. And I know it's online and everything else, but nevertheless, you still have to practice doing math problems. Anyways, thanks for watching the video. This was all about you, okay, and you getting to pass this GED, which you can. I am so just happy with the results that I'm getting from GED math lessons, helping people pass, and I'm telling you something, you put the work in, you'll pass as well. So thanks for watching, and hope to see you over in my free course, and all the best. Have a great day.